In this lesson, we're going to drill down deeper into the concept of the chain of digital signatures and look at exactly how it plays out in the transfer of Bitcoins. As Satoshi Nakamoto specified, we define an electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures. That's what we're going to review in this lesson. He further specifies that each owner transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding these to the end of the coin. Let's see exactly what that means. We go back to the imagery of the check and we specified that a Bitcoin transaction has three key elements. It's got an input, it's got an output, and it's got the amount of the transaction. Satoshi Nakamoto specifies that the way the transfer happens is by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding them to the end of the coin. Before we go deeper into that, let's assume that we've already done a transfer. If we sign this transaction, we will be assigned a transaction ID. This is a hash. This is exactly what we mean by the name of the transaction. The name of the transaction is a hash. It's a transaction ID. So taking that context of each owner transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding them to the end of the coin, the only way that we were able to reach this hash ID that we see here ending in BCA is if we already had the hash ID for the previous transaction. So in order to be able to execute this transfer, what was done is that the Bitcoin transaction hashed the previous transaction along with the public key or output, which is the person that it's targeted to, and adding them to the end of the coin. So when you combine the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner, which is defined by the Bitcoin address, you are granted the new hash ID, which is the name of the transaction. Now that we've discussed what a Bitcoin transaction is, and we've also explored what the chain of signatures is, let's look now at how it applies to the transaction we saw of Alice sending 5 Bitcoins to Ben. As we stated, in order for Alice to be able to send 5 Bitcoins to Ben, she needs to have at least 5 Bitcoins available. She also needs to have access to Ben's Bitcoin address, which she has received because Ben shared it with her. Let's see how the whole thing plays out by building the transaction that will enable her to send those 5 Bitcoins to Ben. First, we need to establish what are the inputs and the outputs as well as the amount. We stated that the input is where the 5 Bitcoins will be coming from. We'll look from within those 20 Bitcoins that she has inside her wallet and try to identify where there are 5 Bitcoins that she will be able to send to Ben. We will define the output by actually using Ben's public key, which in this case is represented by his Bitcoin address, which is a hashed version of his public key. In order for Alice to be able to send 5 Bitcoins to Ben, she needs to be able to find enough previous transactions that when combined, they will provide at least 5 Bitcoins, which she can successfully transfer in this transaction. In order to do that, the wallet will look through all previous transactions that have been received in order to put together a transaction of at least 5 Bitcoins. To that end, the wallet has identified 4 transactions, which are previous transactions that Alice has received in previous occasions, and when combined, they give her a total of 5.6 Bitcoins. If Alice were to send this transaction right now, we would need to digitally sign a hash of these previous transactions along with the public key of the next owner, meaning Ben, and then add those to the end of the coin. Let's see how that would play out. If Alice were to send these 5.6 Bitcoins to Ben, what we would find is that Ben was supposed to only receive 5 Bitcoins. If Ben were to claim his 5 Bitcoins, the remaining 0.6 Bitcoins would go to the miner that successfully mines this transaction. That is how the protocol is structured. Any unclaimed Bitcoins that are not received by the recipient are automatically assigned to the miner that successfully mines the block where that transaction is placed. This is in addition to the mining reward that that miner would receive for successfully mining the block. However, in this case, Alice would not want to leave 0.6 Bitcoins to go to the miner. So she would have instead structure the transaction to send only 5 Bitcoins to Ben and would have assigned a transaction fee that would be paid to the miner. In that case, there would be change brought back to Alice, and it would be sent as a new transaction, which Alice would receive. In other words, what would happen is that the wallet would send one transaction to Ben for 5 Bitcoins. It would pay the transaction fee that belongs to the miner that successfully mines his transaction, and the rest would be sent back as a new transaction, in this case, the change going back to Alice. At this point, Alice will be able to use that new transaction, meaning transaction 5, as a future input in new transactions that she may want to do in the future. And Ben will have received these 5 Bitcoins as transaction 4, and he will be able to use those coins in a future transaction. This is what is known as putting the owner at the end of the coin, because in this case, Ben has become the new owner of those 5 Bitcoins.